Why strong souls are born into toxic families. Carl Jung's view on trauma and spiritual wisdom. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But what if your journey of self-acceptance began in the most unexpected place? Your own family? In today's video on spiritual wisdom, we're exploring why strong souls are often born into toxic families, and how trauma is not a curse, but a spiritual invitation to awaken. This isn't just theory. It's a roadmap to inner power, healing, and growth. Have you ever felt like the black sheep, yet somehow the most aware one in your family? Drop a comment and share your experience. Your story might resonate with someone else seeking spiritual awakening. Let's dive deep into the wisdom that can turn pain into purpose and help you rise stronger than ever. 1. Toxic families are not a mistake. They are a spiritual assignment. Toxic families are not a random occurrence. They are sacred contracts chosen by spiritually gifted souls long before birth. The chaos, neglect, emotional volatility, or silence isn't a punishment, but a precise environment curated by the soul's higher intelligence to awaken latent power. According to Carl Jung, individuation, the process of becoming your truest self, doesn't unfold in comfort, but is forged in the crucible of shadow, pain, and resistance. The child who sees what others ignore, who feels what others suppress, becomes the outcast, the black sheep, the truth teller that the family tries to silence. But within this painful alienation lies divine purpose. These souls are not here to repeat the patterns, they are here to disrupt them, to bring ancestral pain to the surface, to turn inherited wounds into wisdom. While others collapse under generational weight, they learn to stand tall, alchemizing suffering into strength, turning observation into clarity, and silence into spiritual sovereignty. Their pain is not just personal, it is generational, even cosmic. They carry the echoes of their ancestors' regrets, the shame left unspoken, the love withheld. But they are not victims. They are spiritual warriors. They learn to feel deeply without drowning, to walk away from blood ties when necessary, and to protect their peace even when it costs them approval. They become deeply intuitive, able to read energy, navigate emotion, and sense truth beneath facades. Their trauma becomes the sacred ground where resilience grows. These lessons can't be taught in books, they are earned in nights of loneliness, in moments when no one comes to save them, in decisions to choose themselves when no one else will. In this quiet fire, they burn off illusions and awaken into a deeper kind of knowing, one that no external validation can replace. Jung reminds us that the journey of becoming who we truly are begins in pain. The pain of not belonging, of being misunderstood, of carrying emotional weight in a home that offers no sanctuary. But this pain is not the end, it is the portal. It cracks the ego open and invites the soul to rise. Once that awakening begins, there is no going back. These individuals start choosing truth over comfort, healing over people-pleasing, boundaries over inherited dysfunction. The toxic family, then, becomes the unexpected doorway to liberation. It teaches them how to recognize manipulation dressed as love, how to hold their light even when surrounded by shadows, and how to turn abandonment into alignment with their higher path. They do not just survive, they transform. They do not just heal, they awaken others. Their very existence becomes a lighthouse for those still lost in generational storms. And in fulfilling this sacred assignment, they don't just change their lives, they change the lineage. Have you ever reflected on your family as a spiritual assignment? If so, share how it shaped your growth in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else. If not, comment, "I'm ready to see the lesson," and join us on this journey of healing and awakening. 2. Pain becomes the catalyst for awakening. Pain, especially in childhood, often disguises itself as punishment, but for the spiritually gifted, it becomes the very forge of transformation. Rejection, emotional neglect, or controlling environments don't simply hurt, they awaken. Sensitive souls, born into these chaotic families, are pushed inward. And in that sacred inward retreat, something divine begins to stir. What appears to be suffering on the outside becomes the initiation of a deeper knowing. That's how spiritual awakening begins, not in comfort, but in the fire. The child who is constantly misunderstood learns to listen to energy, not words. The one who's told to be silent learns to speak to the divine. The one who's never fully seen develops the inner vision to see through lies, ego, and illusion. These are not coincidences. They are the hidden curriculum of pain, the kind of spiritual wisdom no book can teach. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And for those born into dysfunction, pain isn't just a feeling, it becomes the path. While others are still sleepwalking through life, these old souls are breaking generational patterns before they even know what trauma means. Their sensitivity is often mocked, their boundaries disrespected, and their intuition dismissed. But that very sensitivity is their compass. Their pain teaches them how to feel everything and then choose what to carry. That's not weakness, it's alchemy. It is how pain transforms into power. When someone has lived without true emotional safety, they build a sanctuary within. They begin to seek truth relentlessly. They develop empathy that borders on psychic insight. They can walk into a room and feel what others are hiding. These aren't mere traits. They are survival skills turned spiritual gifts. The toxic family becomes the unintentional teacher, the crucible where resilience and revelation are forged. Eventually, the question shifts from, "Why did this happen to me?" to "What is this awakening me to?" That shift is everything. It marks the difference between living in reaction to the past and living in service to something higher. The strong soul begins to see the purpose behind the pain, not as justification for harm, but as a sign that they were meant to walk a different path. A path of healing, awakening, and leading others through the dark. Spiritual awakening is not a blissful escape. It is a courageous return to the self-wounded, sacred, whole. It is the realization that the darkness didn't destroy you. It refined you. That you didn't just survive what tried to silence you. You turned it into a voice that heals. And that voice, born in pain, speaks spiritual wisdom that transcends generations. If your pain has been your teacher, your guide, or your awakening, comment below. I rise through the pain to affirm your journey and inspire others to embrace their own spiritual growth. 3. You're the black sheep because you're the most spiritually awake. In toxic families, the one who feels like an outsider is usually the one who sees most clearly. The so-called black sheep is often the one who refuses to stay silent, who challenges generational patterns, who is emotionally attuned to everything unspoken. They're misunderstood, labeled as difficult, dramatic, or too sensitive, But that sensitivity is not a flaw. It's spiritual intelligence in action. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, often begins in discomfort. And for many, that discomfort is rooted in the family. You weren't placed in a broken system by accident. You were born into it because you carry the strength to transform it. You were chosen to question what others avoid, to feel what others suppress, and to heal what others deny. In every toxic dynamic, there's usually one soul who says, "This ends with me." That soul is not the problem, it's the pattern breaker. You may feel isolated, but that isolation is part of your awakening. The shame you carry is not yours, it's inherited. And when you begin to see clearly, to speak honestly, and to set boundaries, the system around you fights to keep you small. Not because you're wrong, but because you threaten the illusion. There's a woman who always knew something was off in her family. The smiles felt forced. The silence felt heavy. When she began therapy, others called her too emotional. When she refused to tolerate manipulation, they said she was being selfish. But Carl Jung reminds us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Her healing made others uncomfortable, but it wasn't about them. Her truth was never too much. Their denial was just too loud. She wasn't rebelling. She was remembering who she was before the conditioning. Strong souls are sent into wounded lineages to break the loop. They're called to alchemize chaos into clarity. But this role is not glamorous. It's painful. You carry wounds that weren't yours, and you still find the courage to love. You've been told you're the problem, when in fact, you're the mirror. Carl Jung believed that when we confront the shadow of our family's hidden pain, we begin the real work of the soul. That work often starts with grief. The grief of knowing you may never receive the love you deserved. But from that grief comes freedom. And from that freedom, wisdom. You don't need to fix anyone. You don't need to convince them to change. Your only task is to stay rooted in your truth. The cycle is broken not by shouting, but by choosing peace. Not by revenge, but by rising above the dysfunction without guilt. You're not abandoning your family when you create distance. You're honoring your spirit. The fact that you feel deeply, question everything, and refuse to shrink, that's not rebellion. That's your awakening. If this message resonates with your journey as the so-called black sheep, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your truth in the comments below. Let's keep awakening together. Your voice matters more than you know. 4. Spiritual immunity is forged through chaos. Living in a toxic family doesn't just hurt, it transforms you. It forces you to stop depending on applause from others and start listening to your inner voice. When love is withheld, when your emotions are dismissed, and when you're constantly made to feel too much or never enough, something within you begins to awaken. Not the kind of awakening that comes through peace, but the kind that is forged in fire. In that fire, your soul is sharpened, not shattered. The chaos around you becomes the training ground for inner clarity. You begin to realize that the validation you craved was a distraction from your own power. Emotional pain becomes your teacher. And what it teaches you is this: not everyone who says they love you knows how to honor your spirit. In fact, those who reject your light are often at war with their own. But instead of shrinking, you start building invisible armor, not walls to shut people out, but boundaries that keep your soul intact. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege often comes through deep suffering. In families where dysfunction is normalized, your awakening begins in isolation. You're the one who sees through the facade. You sense the tension behind the smiles. You feel the unspoken wounds. And though you're made to feel like the problem, you carry the truth. That's why the scapegoat often becomes the seer. The rejected one becomes the revealer. Spiritual wisdom is not something handed to you, it is something you bleed for. In environments that should have nurtured you, but instead wounded you, you learn discernment. You begin to separate projection from reality, love from manipulation, empathy from emotional slavery. Slowly, you stop trying to save people who keep choosing to stay asleep. You stop explaining your intuition to those committed to misunderstanding it. You grow quieter, but more powerful. Boundaries become your sacred practice. No longer are you the emotional sponge for your family's unresolved trauma. You learn that self-abandonment is not love. You choose peace over performance. You choose truth over harmony when harmony is fake. You begin to live from your center rather than the chaos around you. That is spiritual immunity, your soul's way of saying, "I know who I am, and I will not betray that knowing for anyone." Through pain, you earn clarity. Through rejection, you find self-respect. And through trauma, you uncover purpose. You no longer react to the noise, you rise above it. You don't need revenge. Your healing is enough. Your growth is your response. And while others remain trapped in cycles, you break them, not just for yourself, but for future generations. This is how strong souls are made, not in comfort, but in contrast. Not in being protected, but in learning to protect themselves. And what they gain from that journey is not bitterness, but unshakable spiritual wisdom, the kind that cannot be taught in books, only lived through in fire. Do you feel that chaos has strengthened your spirit? If so, declare it boldly in the comments. My soul is forged in fire, and I rise. 5. You must use spiritual tools to survive and evolve. You were not placed in a painful environment to suffer. You were placed there to awaken. When love is scarce and chaos is constant, the soul either breaks or begins to remember its origin. And for strong souls like yours, remembrance begins with reclaiming your connection to the divine. The spiritual umbilical cord is not just a metaphor, it's your energetic lifeline. It's the invisible thread that connects you to unconditional love, even when no one around you knows how to give it. In moments of loneliness or rejection, close your eyes and visualize this golden cord extending from your heart into the heart of God, Source, or the universe, whatever name you give to the highest love. Feel it feeding you, reminding you that you are not alone, not forgotten, not unloved. You've always been connected to something greater than the chaos around you. But love alone is not enough when you're surrounded by pain. That's where shadow awareness comes in. Carl Jung taught us that people don't just act out their darkness, they project it. If you've been criticized, shamed, or blamed for things that never made sense, it's likely you were absorbing someone else's unhealed wounds. Shadow awareness allows you to step back from the drama and see clearly. Their anger is not yours to fix. Their pain is not your burden to carry. You begin to understand that many people fear your light because it exposes the parts of themselves they've tried to ignore. And so they attack, not because you are wrong, but because you remind them of the healing they've avoided. When you stop internalizing their projections, you reclaim your clarity and your spiritual awakening deepens. Then comes the sacred tool of boundaries without guilt. In toxic families, boundaries are often seen as betrayal. But the truth is, boundaries are your soul's way of saying, I choose peace. You don't owe anyone access to your spirit just because you share blood. Choosing distance is not a sign of hate. It's a declaration of self-respect. You can still love them, pray for them, and wish them healing from afar. The guilt you feel is not your intuition. It's conditioning. And when you break that conditioning, you don't become cold. You become conscious. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's sacred. It's how you create space for growth, for joy, for truth to return. These tools are not luxury. They are survival. And more than that, they are transformation. When you apply them consistently, you stop asking, why was I born into this? And start seeing, this is where I rise. You begin to understand that spiritual awakening doesn't happen in temples. It happens in tension, in choosing love over resentment, in walking away without apology, in standing firm in your truth, even if it makes you the outsider. Because sometimes the black sheep is just the family's first awakened soul. Don't forget to subscribe for more spiritual wisdom on how to protect your energy, heal deeply, and evolve with intention. Your growth isn't optional. It's sacred. 6. Your healing threatens their illusions. Your healing is a quiet revolution. And to those still trapped in illusion, it's a threat. When you begin to grow, when you choose inner peace over family patterns of drama and denial, your light unsettles them. Not because you're wrong, but because your evolution demands self-reflection from those who've spent their lives avoiding it. In toxic families, dysfunction becomes the norm. Pain becomes a language. So when you start to speak a new emotional language, one of boundaries, self-worth, and truth, they don't recognize you anymore. They resist, mock, or label you as difficult. But what they're really reacting to is the discomfort of your clarity. You've become a mirror they didn't ask for. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. That's why your transformation can feel like betrayal to them, because it's easier to blame the one who changes than to question the system everyone else is still surviving in. You challenge their comfort zone by refusing to participate in it. You disrupt their narrative just by being honest. And the more you align with your truth, the more exposed their illusions feel. Imagine a family gathering where you no longer laugh at harmful jokes, no longer apologize for things you didn't do, no longer entertain manipulation disguised as concern. Suddenly, you're the problem. But you're not the problem. You're just not playing the role anymore. You're no longer available to be the scapegoat, the peacemaker, or the emotional sponge. And that, to them, is threatening. Because now, they have to face the void you've left behind, a void once filled by your silence. There's a story of a woman who began healing from childhood trauma. She didn't confront her family with rage. She simply stopped explaining herself. She started choosing peace. She started saying no. And slowly, the dynamic shifted. Her family grew colder. The emotional invitation stopped coming. But deep inside, she was freer than she'd ever been. Carl Jung called this process individuation becoming whole. by embracing the parts of ourselves we were taught to hide. And sometimes, that wholeness costs us connection with those still addicted to fragmentation. You might notice that as you heal, your presence alone disturbs those who haven't yet begun. They might try to reel you back in, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of being left behind, fear of the unknown, because your growth suggests that change is possible, and that terrifies those who've built their identity around pain. In truth, they don't hate your healing. They hate what it reveals in them, the unlived life, the unresolved grief, the parts of themselves still aching for freedom. Carl Jung also said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege comes with price. You'll be misunderstood. You'll be accused of changing too much, of being too sensitive, too distant, or too spiritual. But what you're really becoming is authentic. And authenticity in a false environment always feels like rebellion. So let it. Let your boundaries be sacred. Let your silence speak volumes. Let your peace offend those who only understand chaos. This isn't cruelty. This is clarity. And clarity is your birthright. In choosing to heal, you're not just liberating yourself. You're showing others what freedom looks like. And even if they resist it now, you've planted a seed. One day, that seed may bloom in them too. If this message resonated with your soul, drop a comment of truth. My healing is sacred. I will not dim my light to comfort others. 7. Your journey turns pain into purpose. Your suffering was never meaningless. It was the sacred forge that shaped you. In the depths of dysfunction, where love came with conditions and peace felt like a distant dream, you were undergoing spiritual training. Every tear, every rejection, every silent cry for understanding was carving you into someone who could see beyond illusion. Carl Jung believed that our true self emerges not in comfort, but through the confrontation of shadow. So when your life began in chaos, it wasn't a cosmic mistake. It was the beginning of your initiation. You were never just the black sheep. You were the seed of consciousness planted in barren soil. The emotional wounds you carried in childhood were not just scars, they were gateways. Once healed, they became portals of wisdom, silent libraries of human experience. That hypersensitivity you were shamed for is now your intuition. That deep pain you once hid has become a map, showing others how to navigate their own. And that loneliness, it taught you how to hear the voice of your own soul. Spiritual wisdom doesn't arrive wrapped in clarity. It comes in the form of questions no one else is asking, in the quiet strength of those who've suffered silently and still choose to rise. You were not given a toxic family to punish you. You were placed there to awaken, to break the generational trance of pain, denial, and silence. While others repeated cycles, you began to question them. While others avoided truth, you started embodying it. You didn't just survive dysfunction, you transmuted it. Now, your presence is power. Not because you demand attention, but because your energy speaks before you do. People feel at your depth, your calm, your knowing. You became the one who listens without judgment, who sees what's unspoken, who holds space for others, because you once needed someone to hold space for you. And that transformation didn't come from external praise. It came from walking through fire alone and emerging whole. You are not late. You are in divine rhythm. The pain was not the end. It was the path. And you, the strong soul born into toxicity, have become something extraordinary. You no longer just carry a story. You carry medicine. And in a world starving for truth, your healing is a revolution. You are not behind. You are becoming. To affirm your transformation and honor the purpose behind your pain, comment below. My journey has meaning. Your story holds power. Let it remind others that healing is never wasted. If this message resonates, like, share, and subscribe for more insights on turning wounds into wisdom. If this message resonated with your soul, remember, your strength was never a coincidence. It was forged through fire so that you could rise and lead others home to healing. Carl Jung once said, "In each of us, there is another whom we do not know." Perhaps that hidden self is waiting to be born from the very pain you've endured. If this speaks to your journey, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Tap the bell so you never miss a moment of insight and transformation. Your healing is your legacy. Carl Jung warned us, the moment an empath snaps, it's game over for the narcissist. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. In today's world, where empaths often carry the weight of silence while narcissists weaponize charm, Jung's wisdom cuts through the noise like a sword of clarity. Have you ever felt the moment you stop absorbing their pain and start reclaiming your power? That's not weakness. It's your awakening. This video isn't just a warning. It's a mirror. A mirror for those who feel deeply, love fiercely, and finally say, enough. What happens when the empath snaps isn't destruction, it's liberation. Comment below. I choose my peace. If you've ever walked away from emotional manipulation and stepped into your own light, let's begin this journey together. 1. The narcissist's mask is a survival mechanism, not confidence. Narcissists are not confident, they are terrified. Beneath their polished surface lies a primitive fear known as annihilation anxiety, a subconscious terror of psychological death. Their charisma is not power, it's camouflage. What looks like arrogance is often just the armor of someone who was once emotionally abandoned, dismissed, or deeply wounded. In childhood, when authenticity was punished or ignored, they crafted a persona, a false self to survive. This persona becomes their default identity, built not to thrive, but to avoid collapse. It is a constant performance, a rehearsed version of strength played on a loop to distract from the internal chaos they cannot bear to confront. At the core of their being is a single crippling belief: I am unlovable. And rather than risk this truth being seen, they manipulate, control, and deflect to keep others at a safe distance. Carl Jung taught that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and in the case of the narcissist, the substitution is a lifelong act. They swap vulnerability for control, connection for domination, and self-reflection for projection. Their inability to self-soothe creates a hunger for admiration that no amount of praise can ever satisfy. Their need to win is not about defeating others. It's about outrunning their own internal void. This makes relationships with narcissists profoundly disorienting for empaths, who feel everything with unbearable clarity. The empath senses the suffering, the fragmentation, the buried child inside the narcissist, but spiritual awakening is not about rescuing others from their masks. It's about recognizing when someone refuses to remove it, no matter how much love you offer. In today's world, where attention is currency and authenticity is rare, narcissistic traits are often mistaken for leadership or confidence. Social media amplifies this confusion, rewarding the curated self and punishing the real one. That's why the spiritually awakened empath must learn to see beyond appearances and honor intuition over illusion. When an empath finally snaps, it is not rage that emerges, it is clarity. The clarity that you were never supposed to carry someone else's wound, that their rejection was a shield, not a verdict, that their silence was self-protection, not proof of your inadequacy. In that sacred moment of realization, the empath doesn't fight back. They walk away, not to punish, but to reclaim. Spiritual wisdom teaches that presence is the greatest mirror. And once you stop dancing around the narcissist's insecurities, the performance collapses. The game ends because you're no longer playing. Your withdrawal is not weakness. It is power matured. It is the embodiment of the truth that you cannot fix what someone refuses to face. And when you stop overgiving, over-explaining, and overextending, you become untouchable to those who feed off confusion. You become the calm that exposes the chaos, the mirror that reflects the unhealed. And in that stillness, something rare is born. Self-respect that no narcissist can fracture, because it no longer seeks approval in the eyes of someone who cannot see clearly. You no longer beg to be loved by someone who's forgotten how to love themselves. You become the ending of their illusion and the beginning of your freedom. Comment below, I see behind the mask. If you're ready to reclaim your power through spiritual wisdom and self-awareness. 2. Behind closed doors, narcissists battle midnight panic. Behind the curated confidence and charm of a narcissist lies a hidden battlefield few ever see, a war that erupts most violently around 3 in the morning. When silence exposes the truth they've spent their entire lives avoiding. This is the hour when the crowd is gone, the applause has faded, and all that remains are the whispers in their mind accusing them of being a fraud. Beneath their outward bravado is a child frozen in shame, paralyzed by the fear of being unmasked. Their mind becomes a courtroom where they stand trial for every word spoken, every action taken, every glance received, obsessively replaying conversations and scanning their memories for imagined flaws. They don't do this for growth. They do it to survive the self-hate echoing through their inner world. Their rituals, whether it's compulsive shopping, meaningless sex, or mind-numbing substances, are not signs of power, but of spiritual disconnection. Desperate attempts to drown out the voice that says, "You're not enough." What they fear most isn't losing control of others. It's losing control of the illusion they've built to protect their fragile identity. Carl Jung warned us that people will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid facing their own souls, and the narcissist embodies this truth to a tragic degree. They wear arrogance like armor, but it is crafted from fear, not superiority. Their need to dominate, to manipulate, to be the center of every story comes not from inner strength, but from spiritual emptiness. They demand constant validation, not because they believe they're special, but because, deep down, they suspect they're worthless without it. And when they sense someone, especially an empath, might see through the mask, panic sets in. That's when the emotional manipulation intensifies. That's when the guilt-tripping, gaslighting, and silent treatment begin. not because they're strong, but because they're terrified. They don't want you to see who they really are. And the more spiritually aware you become, the more dangerous your presence feels to them, because your clarity is a mirror they cannot bear to face. But the real shift happens when the empath, after enduring cycles of confusion and compassion, finally reaches the edge, not out of anger, but out of awakening. When the empath snaps, it's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It is the moment the people-pleasing ends and the self-respect begins. It is the sacred point in spiritual development where you stop dimming your light to protect their shadow. You stop sacrificing your peace to keep the connection. You stop rescuing someone who was never drowning, only performing. And in that moment, the power dynamic shatters, because nothing is more threatening to a narcissist than an empath who has awakened to their own worth. You begin to set boundaries, speak truth without fear, and reclaim the energy you once gave away too freely. And suddenly, their tactics no longer work. Their silence doesn't hurt. Their chaos doesn't pull you back in. You become emotionally untouchable, not because you've hardened, but because you've healed. Spirituality isn't about endlessly giving. It's about knowing when giving becomes enabling. Your growth is not betrayal, it is liberation. And as they spiral in the quiet corners of the night, still haunted by their unhealed wounds, you rise not in revenge, but in radiant peace. 3. Emotional blindness and the empath trap. Many narcissists live behind a well-crafted emotional mask, not out of confidence, but because they suffer from alexithymia, the inability to name and process their emotions. They don't truly feel their feelings. They just react to them. Fear becomes anger, and shame erupts as rage. This is not emotional maturity. It is emotional blindness. So what do? They unconsciously gravitate toward empaths, those with spiritual intelligence, depth of insight, and a rare aura of sensitivity, because empaths can feel what narcissists cannot. Empaths become emotional translators, decoding unspoken fear, absorbing suppressed pain, and attempting to create connection where there is only confusion. But what starts as intuitive understanding soon transforms into spiritual exploitation. This is not love. It's a dynamic of energetic imbalance, one where the empath becomes the source of nourishment and the narcissist the taker of light. And here lies the deeper wound. Intimacy, which should bring people together, feels like death to the narcissist. Vulnerability exposes the truth, and that threatens their carefully crafted persona. So they create a push-pull dance, luring the empath in with flattery and false depth, only to push them away the moment emotional closeness touches their unhealed core. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And this truth echoes loudly in every relationship where the empath becomes the mirror, and the narcissist can't bear to look. When the empath tries to help, they're met with silence. When they love harder, they're met with withdrawal. And when they finally begin to wake up, they realize the connection was never mutual. It was emotional survival for one and spiritual sacrifice for the other. But when an empath snaps, it's not rage, it's clarity. It's no longer mistaking spiritual wisdom for suffering in silence. It's recognizing the manipulation wrapped in affection and the projection masquerading as intimacy. The moment an empath stops translating emotions for someone who refuses to learn their own language, the entire illusion collapses. That's when the dynamic ends, not with a fight, but with awareness. The empath walks away, no longer trying to heal someone who's weaponizing their pain. This is not just psychological freedom. It is a profound spiritual awakening. It is the reclaiming of power, of presence, of peace. True emotional intelligence is not rescuing those who exploit your compassion. It's setting boundaries that honor your worth. You are not here to be consumed. You are not here to be broken open and left to rebuild yourself alone. You are here to feel, to grow, and to be met with the same depth you give. Carl Jung taught us that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And when the empath does, the need to fix others disappears. The narcissist's game ends not in confrontation, but in quiet liberation. This is the sacred breaking point where the empath chooses clarity over chaos, truth over illusion, and spiritual strength over emotional servitude. Stay connected with our growing community of spiritual wisdom by subscribing to the channel. Here, we explore the deep emotional patterns that shape our lives and break free together. Remember, your empathy is not a weakness, it's your superpower. You are not here to be drained, but to rise. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss the healing you deserve. 4. Envy and control are not power. They're survival. Real power is not rooted in domination, but in emotional clarity and spiritual presence. Narcissists, however, confuse control with power because they live in a world shaped by fear, not truth. Carl Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking." Narcissists operate through a zero-sum lens. If someone else shines, they feel dimmed. If someone else succeeds, they feel diminished. That insecurity breeds envy, and envy becomes a weapon. They criticize those who love them, devalue those who support them, and undermine those who reflect their own lack of self. You'll notice this pattern in how they respond to your growth. The brighter you become, the more they try to dim you, not because they hate your light, but because they've never learned how to generate their own. Their survival depends on control, and their tactics of love bombing, silent treatment, praise, then punish cycles are not rooted in cruelty, but in a desperate need to regulate their inner chaos. This is not power. This is panic disguised as precision. They orchestrate connection through manipulation because genuine intimacy terrifies them. When you're spiritually awake, you begin to see this clearly. Control is not connection. Love does not need to be staged to be real. But to someone who's only known love through emotional conditions and psychological performance, freedom feels dangerous. This is where the tragedy unfolds, because in trying to control the relationship, they drain it of the very authenticity they crave. The more they manipulate, the less real the love becomes. And then they use that absence as proof that love was never real to begin with. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, built on fear and reinforced by spiritual blindness. Your role, especially as an empath, is not to absorb their wounds as your truth. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a form of intelligence, a reflection of your spiritual wisdom. In a world that worships control and punishes feeling, your emotional depth is revolutionary. But you must protect it. You must remember that just because someone fears abandonment does not mean you must abandon yourself to stay. Their fear does not justify your self-erasure. You cannot heal someone by becoming less of who you are. In modern life, this dynamic shows up everywhere. Relationships where you're constantly apologizing for existing. Families where love is conditional. Workplaces where charisma masks toxicity. When you start awakening, the veil lifts. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. So you stop shrinking. You stop explaining. You stop carrying the emotional weight of someone who refuses to feel their own. You realize that boundaries are not walls. They're doors. And you don't lock people out with them. You simply stop letting chaos in. The moment you honor your peace more than their projection is the moment the game ends. And not because you won, it's because you stopped playing. That is the essence of spiritual awakening. Not just realizing what you deserve, but refusing to negotiate it any longer. 5. Criticism is a tool to keep you off balance. Their constant criticism isn't random. It's calculated to keep you off balance, second-guessing yourself, and slowly detaching from your inner truth. It's a silent war, where every disapproving glance, every helpful correction chips away at your confidence and subtly teaches you to seek their approval instead of trusting your own voice. This isn't always delivered with open cruelty. In fact, many narcissists genuinely believe they are offering you guidance. But that's what makes it so insidious. They weaponize concern, wrapping control in the disguise of care. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's exactly what they don't want you to do. Because your self-acceptance threatens the power they hold over you. If you become anchored in your own worth, their ability to manipulate through emotional destabilization disappears. They can't dominate someone who no longer doubts themselves. The target is always your pride or your deepest insecurity, those raw places within you that still ache for validation. And every time you react, every time you get defensive or hurt, they take it as proof that they still have control. But here's the truth. Their criticism isn't about truth. It's about control. It's about making sure you stay small enough to be manageable. When you begin to see this dynamic clearly, you realize it has nothing to do with your growth and everything to do with their fear of losing emotional superiority. Spirituality teaches us to become the observer, to rise above reaction and step into inner alignment. When you finally stop absorbing their words like gospel and instead begin to see them as reflections of their own unresolved pain, something in you shifts. That shift is the birth of spiritual development. It's the moment when clarity replaces confusion, when your peace becomes more important than their praise. You begin to reclaim your energy, no longer pouring it into convincing them of your worth, but instead into grounding yourself in it. And that is when the empath snaps not in rage, but in realization. That moment isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's the quiet ending of a game you never agreed to play. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing. You stop shrinking to fit their comfort zone. You rise not to fight, but to walk away. Because you now understand that their need to correct you was never about helping you evolve, but about making sure you never outgrow them. And once you choose your spiritual growth over their approval, it's game over. Have you ever felt that criticism was used to confuse you, not help you? If you see it now with clarity, declare your truth in the comments. I trust my intuition. not their control. 6. They understand emotions, but cannot feel them. They know how to read your feelings, but they cannot feel them. That's the unsettling truth about many narcissists. They possess cognitive empathy, the ability to intellectually identify your emotions, but they lack affective empathy, the emotional capacity to actually feel what you're feeling. So when they look at you with soft eyes or offer comforting words, it may seem like they care, but something always feels off. That's because what you're witnessing is a performance of a carefully rehearsed act without any emotional resonance. Their intelligence allows them to mimic concern, but it's void of real connection. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And the narcissist does exactly that. Deep within, they know something is missing. They sense the emotional emptiness, the absence of real connection. But they have spent years, sometimes decades, constructing psychological walls so thick that even they cannot break through them. These walls were built to keep pain out, but in doing so, they also locked love away. You, as an empath, show up like a mirror they never asked for. Your energy, your rare spiritual intelligence, exposes what they've been hiding from: vulnerability, authenticity, and the soul's desire for connection. You don't just speak with emotion, you radiate it. And that spiritual presence threatens everything they've built their identity upon. While they cling to control and image, you move with feeling and depth. That contrast triggers them, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something real. Your emotional wisdom lights up the very darkness they've refused to explore. And suddenly, the illusion starts to crack. But here's the twist. The moment you stop tolerating the emotional disconnect, the moment you snap and say, "Enough," that's not your downfall. That is your awakening. That is the spiritual shift where the game ends, not for you, but for the illusion they've maintained. When the empath snaps, it's not rage, it's clarity. It's not revenge, it's revelation. You no longer beg to be felt. You no longer make excuses for being invisible to someone who only sees you when it serves them. You walk away, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself. You honor your sensitivity. You protect your soul. You stop being a mirror for their false self and become a reflection of your own truth. This isn't a breakdown, it's your breakthrough. And from that moment forward, nothing is ever the same. You've just reminded them of the one thing they can't control: your inner freedom. Your spiritual wisdom becomes your boundary. Your emotional intelligence becomes your shield. And your awakening becomes the end of their performance. 7. When the mask cracks, narcissistic rage emerges. When the mask of control begins to crack, what erupts from beneath is not confidence, but terror disguised as rage. Narcissistic rage is not born from strength, but from a deep fracture in the false self. When a narcissist is criticized, loses control, feels irrelevant with age, or senses their manipulation no longer works, they suffer what psychology calls a narcissistic injury. This injury threatens their fragile identity, which is often built entirely on performance, praise, and illusion. And when that identity shatters, the rage that follows is not a reaction. It is a survival mechanism. This rage can take many forms: verbal abuse, emotional withdrawal, revisionist storytelling, or the cold act of discarding someone without explanation. It is not calculated evil, but a psychological emergency, a desperate attempt to restore control in a world that no longer reflects their grandiosity. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this perfectly captures the narcissist's dilemma. They are not aware of what drives them, only that they are terrified of being exposed as ordinary, vulnerable, or wrong. What makes this dynamic so dangerous is that those on the receiving end, often empaths, tend to personalize the narcissist's collapse. They question themselves, try to fix the situation, or take on the blame. But in the realm of spirituality and spiritual awakening, the lesson is clear. This was never about you. The narcissist isn't attacking you. They are defending the illusion of who they believe they must be. Their identity depends on admiration and control. Your authenticity, your clarity, your refusal to collapse under manipulation becomes a direct threat to their survival fantasy. And so they rage not to destroy you, but to preserve the mask. The spiritual wisdom here is profound. You must stop trying to soothe someone who uses your compassion as a weapon. In modern relationships, where power games often replace emotional presence, the awakened empath must step back and say, "This energy does not belong to me." Empathy without boundaries becomes self-abandonment, and self-abandonment is the true cost of staying in a cycle of abuse disguised as love. The spiritual path is not about rescuing those who refuse to heal. It is about honoring your own light without guilt. When someone discards you during a moment of rage, rewrites history to make themselves the victim, or punishes you with silence, understand that you are witnessing their internal collapse. Do not absorb their storm. Do not mirror their madness. Your calm is their chaos. Your detachment, their undoing. In the words of Jung, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. So choose to awaken. Choose truth over illusion. Choose clarity over confusion. Let your spiritual intelligence guide you not into the flames of someone else's self-destruction, but into the quiet knowing that you are not here to be someone's emotional scapegoat. You are here to become whole. If you're still with us, type, "I'm concentrating" in the comments. Your focus matters, and your feedback helps us build a stronger spiritual awakening community. Let's keep this energy of spiritual wisdom alive together. 8. The relationship cycle. Fantasy, devaluation, discard. The relationship cycle between an empath and a narcissist is not merely a toxic pattern. It's a deeply spiritual journey disguised as a psychological trap. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In the beginning, the narcissist doesn't approach with obvious manipulation. Instead, they arrive with a desperate need to secure attachment, flooding the empath with affection, attention, and validation in a phase known as love bombing. This isn't love, it's survival. The narcissist is terrified of abandonment and is clinging to the illusion of being worthy, seen, and adored. To the empath, this may feel like a spiritual connection, a cosmic encounter with someone who finally sees their soul. But it is actually the beginning of a cycle that threatens their emotional stability and spiritual development. As time passes and the empath begins to show genuine needs for emotional intimacy, reciprocity, and vulnerability, the narcissist's fear begins to rise. They don't see these needs as normal. They see them as dangerous because they threaten the carefully constructed mask they wear. Their identity is built on performance, not authenticity. And so begins the devaluation phase, where the empath is slowly pushed off the pedestal, criticized for being too sensitive, blamed for being needy, and made to feel like a burden simply for expressing normal human emotions. This psychological shift is more than confusing. It's a form of spiritual disorientation. The empath begins to question their worth, their reality, and their intuition. Yet this unraveling is where the deeper transformation begins, because once an empath learns to trust their inner voice and recognize that their emotions are not flaws, but signs of deep intelligence and awareness, they begin to awaken. But the final blow is the discard. This usually happens not when the empath fails the narcissist, but precisely when they offer genuine love. The moment the empath says, "I see you. I accept you," the narcissist panics. Why? Because they've built their entire identity around avoiding being truly seen. To be loved unconditionally means their mask must fall, and that is their greatest terror. So they sabotage the connection, discard the empath, and blame them for the collapse. Ironically, it is when the empath is most spiritually aligned, most honest, most open, that the narcissist retreats the fastest. Here's the truth. This cycle ends the moment the empath snaps not with rage, but with clarity. When the empath finally sees the pattern and walks away with dignity, they don't just break free, they transcend. This is the moment when spirituality becomes more than just an idea. It becomes embodied. True spiritual development begins when you no longer try to heal others to earn love, when you no longer trade your peace for someone's potential, and when you realize that boundaries are not walls, they're sacred lines drawn by your soul. So if you are an empath caught in this cycle, let this be your awakening. You are not here to carry someone else's emotional immaturity. You are here to remember your worth, reclaim your energy, and rise into relationships that reflect the truth of your being. Comment below, "I choose peace over patterns," if you are ready to break the cycle and step into your spiritual power. 9. Aging narcissists and the collapse of the mask. As narcissists grow older, the illusion they've carefully maintained begins to crumble. Their physical allure fades, accolades lose their shine, and the admiration they once manipulated no longer flows so freely. Without this narcissistic supply, they begin to unravel. What once gave them an inflated sense of self was never rooted in truth. It was built on performance, not presence. And when time strips away their props, they're left staring into the emptiness of their own unhealed psyche. Carl Jung warned us that the persona, the mask we wear to face the world, can become a prison when we confuse it with our identity. For the aging narcissist, the collapse of the mask is not just painful, it's terrifying. They're not just losing admiration, they're losing control over the only narrative they ever believed made them valuable. This internal crisis often manifests as heightened paranoia, obsessive control, and emotional volatility. The more irrelevant they feel, the more desperate they become to assert dominance. They micromanage, manipulate, lash out anything to avoid confronting the spiritual emptiness they've denied for decades. Their intelligence, once used to charm or impress, becomes a weapon twisting facts, rewriting history, projecting guilt. Their conversations become about power, not connection. And underneath it all is a soul too afraid to look inward. They cannot bear stillness because stillness reveals the truth. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But for the narcissist, that level of self-awareness feels like annihilation. Empaths, on the other hand, feel this decay long before it's visible. You notice the subtle hostility in their words, the manipulative undertones in their affection, the spiritual decay behind their charisma. You try to help, to understand, to rescue, but your love becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything they're trying to hide. You begin to suffer under the weight of their disconnection, and yet you stay until one day you don't. The empath snap isn't loud or violent. It's silent, resolute, divine. It's the moment you reclaim your soul from the cycle of pleasing someone who only loved your reflection when it served them. This moment, the moment you walk away, is the moment the narcissist faces the very terror they've spent a lifetime escaping: themselves. Without someone to project onto, the aging narcissist spirals deeper into isolation. They become haunted by the very silence they once used as punishment. Their need for validation becomes frantic, but fewer people are listening. And the ones who do stay see through the act. Spiritual wisdom reveals that aging is meant to be a return to essence, a shedding of ego, a softening into truth. But for those who never cultivated an inner life, aging becomes a spiritual reckoning. The narcissist, without the applause, is forced to meet the self they abandoned long ago. And often, they don't recognize who's staring back. 10. Empaths must prioritize strategy over sympathy. You've been conditioned to believe that empathy means endurance, that compassion means tolerating chaos. But the truth is, without strategy, your empathy becomes a trap. Narcissists don't seek love. They seek control masked as connection. And empaths, driven by their need to heal and be understood, often become the perfect supply. The relationship is not built on love, but on a subconscious agreement. The narcissist avoids exposure, and the empath avoids abandonment. This cycle of dysfunction thrives on your silence, your forgiveness, your hope that they'll change. But Carl Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The narcissist projects their darkness onto you, so they never have to see it within themselves. And the empath, until they awaken, absorbs that projection, mistaking it for their own reflection. This is where the spiritual awakening begins, when you realize you are not responsible for their healing, their rage, or their repeated betrayals. The moment you stop needing validation from someone who weaponizes your heart against you, you reclaim your energy. You don't need them to understand your pain, because their power lies in your constant explaining. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Stop justifying your boundaries. The boundary itself is enough. It is your energetic line in the sand, a declaration that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. The gray rock method isn't emotional coldness, it's strategic stillness. It's the act of becoming unresponsive, not because you don't care, but because you've transcended their control game. You become boring to their chaos, invisible to their manipulation, immune to their bait. And that neutrality is your power. The spiritual wisdom here is in the detachment, not the fight. Your role is not to win the argument, it's to exit the arena entirely. Healing is not found in getting closure from a narcissist. It's found in no longer needing it. Let the wound close without their apology. Let the silence be your sanctuary. Let your lack of reaction be your loudest response. The narcissist's greatest fear is not confrontation, it's indifference. When you stop feeding their need for attention, their illusion collapses. And in that collapse, you rise not because you proved them wrong, but because you remembered your worth. This is not just about psychology, it's about energetic sovereignty. You're no longer living from the wound, you're living from the wisdom it gave you. You now understand that your spirituality is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how clearly you can walk away from what depletes your soul. You are not abandoning them. You are finally choosing yourself. And in doing so, you break the cycle not only for yourself, but for every empath who's ever mistaken survival for love. 11. True recovery is inner work, not fixing them. True recovery doesn't begin by dissecting the narcissist's behavior. It begins the moment you turn inward and ask why you tolerated it in the first place. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And in this spiritual awakening, you realize that the narcissist was never the main character of your healing story. They were a mirror, showing you the wounds you were too busy caretaking to confront. Every time you excused their coldness, minimized your needs, or overextended your empathy, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you had been conditioned to confuse love with sacrifice. But spirituality is the art of remembering. Remembering that you were never meant to be someone's emotional regulator. That your role was never to fix chaos in hopes of receiving breadcrumbs of validation. You were meant to heal the abandonment wounds that whispered, "If I love harder, they'll stay," and face the subconscious belief that love must be earned through pain. Once you begin this inner work, your energy shifts, boundaries become second nature. Self-respect replaces overgiving, and your nervous system no longer seeks the highs and lows of emotional volatility. The narcissist's control loses its grip, not because they change, but because you do. You stop magnetizing those who feed off your light, because your light is no longer dimmed by self-neglect. In this stage of spiritual development, empathy becomes sacred, not something to be exploited, but something to be shared with those who reciprocate. You understand that true compassion includes yourself, that healing isn't about becoming harder, but about becoming whole. And through this wholeness, you step into your power, not with rage, but with clarity, not with bitterness, but with sovereignty. You realize you don't need to fix them. You need to honor you. This is when the game changes. Because when an empath heals, sets boundaries, and protects their peace, the narcissist loses their influence. Not through confrontation, but through disinterest. Not through revenge, but through evolution. You ascend, and in doing so, you leave behind the cycles that once felt like home. This is the essence of spiritual wisdom, not the need to control others, but the courage to transform yourself. Let that be the lesson. Your empathy was never the problem. Your lack of protection around it was. Now, you know better. Now, you choose differently. Thank you for watching Spiritual Wisdom. If this message spoke to something deep within you, trust that it wasn't by accident. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So if you felt the shift, the awakening, the moment when the empath rises. Honor that power. Don't let it fade. Like this video to affirm your truth. Share it to support others on their journey. And subscribe to our channel to continue walking this path of spiritual wisdom together. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment that might just change everything. Until next time, stay aware, stay empowered, and stay true to your light.